Okay, first of all, I would like to thank Michele and Nicoletta for inviting me to join this really exciting conversation on, and I'm quoting from the call for papers for the initial call, the relationship between social change and evolution of language usage. I will draw on my research in translation studies to reflect on the formation of Italian vocabularies of homosexual liberation and gay liberation, which have appeared in Italy in various guises since the 1960s. So the framing of this panel implicitly makes reference to the contemporary strategies of the Italian lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender movement to oppose, and I quote again from the initial call of this panel, the permanence in Italy of discourses on gender and sexuality oriented in a homophobic and transphobic way. So national LGBT organizations have for a long time adapted and localized transnational vocabularies of sexual citizenship. So a set of words that interpolate subjects as members of a sexual minority within the nation. So an identifiable group that forms a knowable part of the wider national community. The Italian translation of this political lexicon would include terms such as visibilità LGBT, coming out, comunità LGBT, diritti LGBT, outing, supporto, diversità, omofobia, bullismo omofobico, and crimini d'odio omofobico. So I would like to suggest that in these instances of linguistic borrowing, these organizations and the individuals who use this language to talk about themselves take on the position of translators of global queer political cultures. Studying the way these subjects talk about themselves then offers us the opportunity to focus on both the transnational and the translational dimensions of the construction of subjectivity. So, a queer theorist, Joseph Massad, famously argued that the Gay International and its westernizing project to liberate homosexuals globally may have the epistemological function or effect of creating gays and lesbians where there simply aren't any. That's Massad. So drawing on Massad, but distancing myself from him to an extent, my interest is more specifically in the creation, in the Italian context, of a discourse of homosexual oppression and liberation, and of a particular organization and management of the self that these discourses entail. So my research interrogates the transnational trajectories of the signifier gay by following its multiple lexical trails. Instead of concentrating on individual lexemes, as a linguist may do, as a translation scholar, I ask what particular stories re-narrate these vocabularies. So I analyzed, for example, the Italian web localization of the US It Gets Better project, an awareness-raising campaign which collects stories of survivors of homophobic violence. The Italian users of the online platform, which I see as translators of this global queer lexicon, follow a format devised in response to LGBT youth suicides in the United States. For this reason, I would suggest that these translators combine their ability to look inward and tell their own localized stories, produce knowledge on the self, with a particular form of literacy, and the intercultural skill of understanding and adapting the American format. So the linguistic borrowing of the buzzwords of LGBT politics is often imagined as an instrument to foster sexualized forms of democratic participation, and therefore extend citizenship to historically excluded subjects. So I'm interested in the trope of borrowing here, which evokes a particular figuration of translation. It imagines translation as an even playing field where a national culture can conveniently turn to a foreign culture, to a foreign archive of solutions to a given problem, notwithstanding the resulted indebtedness to the source. Thus, borrowing is imagined as a sort of movement forward, just opposed to the backwardness of homophobic language. My findings in this particular example, encourage us to rethink this conceit. So the pervasiveness of homophobic language on the Italian media, which is a problem that I am not willing to underestimate, can certainly be interpreted as an anomaly, setting Italy apart from what Eric Fasson calls the Western sexual democracy. In this interpretation, Italy's deficiencies vis-à-vis the model sexual democracies such as the US, the UK, the Netherlands, support the familiar Italy as Western anomaly argument. So Danielle Hipkins, for example, remarked in relation to the objectification of women in Italian visual culture that this argument on Italy as Western anomaly risks reifying sexist representations as national, rather than interrogating them as part of the transnational emergence of neoliberal gendered subjectivities. In the original videos of the It Gets Better project, an LGBT individuals, the format imagines an LGBT individual overcoming the hardships of their teenage years, moving to the big city, finding a romantic partner, and living a happy adult life. So in this sense, the project positions sexual minorities alongside the ethnic minorities who have been famously exhorted to pull themselves up by the bootstraps by asking the victim of bullying to take action to improve their own life. These source texts then seem to me to propose a trickle-down version of social change, in which an imagined fight for equality is entrenched in ideas of self-fashioning and individual responsibility. So instead I noticed that the localized Italian campaign often disavowed aspects of the original message and actually rewrote others quite radically, even though the buzzwords coming out, supporto, diversità, homophobia recurrently appeared. The US campaign located homophobia in a set of clearly demarcated social spaces. For example, the mid-sized American city, the rural backwater, the church, the Catholic school. By really significant and evident contrast, in the Italian localized version, many of the Italian narrators, translators, argue that homophobia is located in the minds of the victims of homophobic bullying, and not in an outside identifiable space. That homophobia, and these are people who are experiencing, can present themselves as targeted with homophobia, but then also explain homophobia away by saying that homophobia is only really there if you're invested in seeing it. So here, what I'm doing, I'm going to conclude and I'm going to kind of wrap up. So I've tried to draw on queer critiques of teleological approaches to history and to social change, and suggest that we take stock of the ambiguities of the language of the language of liberation and of the language of equality. So in my example, the translated version interpreted the original by holding a mirror up to it, so to speak, and shoring up the discursive tension between social change and individual responsibility. A discursive tension that is already very, very present in the original, but that somehow the translation exasperates it and brings it out in a particular way. To conclude, I would like to suggest that by approaching translation, not as an even playing field, not as an equal exchange, but as an interrogation of a source, of an imagined source, we might be able to complicate teleological investments in the evolution of language usage, and therefore also complicate binaries of conservative versus progressive liberatory language.